There comes a moment in every woman's life when she looks in the mirror and realizes she's been giving away pieces of herself she can never get back. Not because she's weak, but because she was taught that love meant sacrifice. She kept quiet when she wanted to speak. She stayed when her soul begged her to leave. She bent until she broke, all for a man who never saw the depth of her worth. But let me tell you something. Every wise woman you've ever admired was once that same broken girl. The only difference is she decided to rise. She decided there are things she will never do again, no matter how much she loves him. Because wisdom is born in fire, and once you've walked through it, you refuse to burn the same way twice. This isn't about bitterness. This is about power. The kind of power that comes from knowing who you are and what you will never allow again. So tonight, I want you to listen closely, because I'm going to share the 5 things a wise woman never does with a man. And once you hear them, you'll never see yourself or love the same way again. She remembered the night so vividly, not because of what was said, but because of the silence that followed. Silence that wasn't peaceful, but heavy, pressing against her chest like a weight. He had left the room once again, after an argument that wasn't really an argument at all, just his dismissals wrapped in casual words. His way of making her feel small without raising his voice. She sat at the edge of the bed, hands trembling, asking herself the same question she had asked 100 times before. Why do I let this happen to me? And in that moment, something inside of her shifted, though she couldn't yet name it. It was the beginning of her becoming. A wise woman doesn't become wise overnight. She is forged in fire, in heartbreak, in the quiet battles no one else sees. She doesn't learn from books or advice columns alone. She learns from her own tears staining the pillow, from the echo of her own voice when she realizes she's explaining herself for the 100th time to someone who never wanted to listen in the first place. She learns in moments when she feels she is losing herself, and it terrifies her more than losing the man ever could. Back then, she was not yet that woman. She was still the girl who thought that if she loved harder, if she stayed patient, if she swallowed her pride one more time, he might finally see her worth. And that's the first truth no one tells you until you've walked through fire yourself. A wise woman never bargains away her dignity for the scraps of someone else's attention. But she didn't know that yet. In the early days, she gave and gave, believing that generosity and love meant self-sacrifice. She excused his coldness, explained away his distance, convinced herself that every man had his flaws and this was simply his. But the flaw wasn't his distance. It was her silence in the face of it. Every time she quieted her own needs, every time she rationalized his neglect, she chipped away at herself. She thought love was endurance, but what she was enduring wasn't love. It was the slow erosion of her soul. She remembered sitting across from him at dinner, her heart full of words she wanted to say. She wanted to tell him how invisible she felt, how much she longed for his eyes to meet hers with warmth instead of indifference. But the moment she opened her mouth, his phone lit up and his gaze followed the screen instead of her. She shut her mouth, smiled faintly, and pushed her food around the plate. That night she cried, quietly in the bathroom so he wouldn't hear. And here's the thing, a wise woman never hides her pain to protect someone else's comfort. She knows her emotions are valid. Her voice deserves space. Her needs are not a burden, but a mirror of her humanity. But wisdom is only born when the silence becomes unbearable. The breaking point came one morning when she caught her own reflection in the mirror. She barely recognized herself. The sparkle in her eyes had dulled, her shoulders slumped. Her laughter had become rare. She realized she was becoming a stranger to her own soul, a woman who existed only in the shadows of his moods, and something inside her whispered, "This is not who you are meant to be." That whisper became a roar over time. The first thing a wise woman never does with a man is lose herself. She never hands over the keys to her identity, her joy, her dreams, in exchange for the illusion of being loved. She may compromise, she may bend, but she does not break herself down into fragments to fit into his narrow box of affection. She remembers that love is supposed to expand her, not diminish her. He hit play, literally, but before she learned this, she had to live through the ache of forgetting herself. There was a day she skipped an important opportunity, an art exhibit where her work had been chosen to be displayed. She had dreamed of this for years. But when he casually mentioned he was having a rough week and didn't want her to go, she stayed home. She told herself it was loyalty. She told herself love was sacrifice. But the truth was she was abandoning herself for a man who wouldn't have done the same. That night, while scrolling through photos of the event online, her heart sank. Friends were congratulating one another, celebrating victories, while her canvas hung unnoticed in the corner of a room she never entered. She realized she wasn't just missing out on opportunities, she was missing out on herself. And that is when the second truth began to form. A wise woman never abandons her own path for a man who cannot even walk beside her on it. She refuses to make herself small so he can feel big. She refuses to dim her light so his insecurities can rest in the dark. She learns that her dreams are sacred. Her voice is sacred. And the right man will never demand her silence. But again, she didn't yet know she was becoming wise. She was still stumbling, still learning, still breaking in all the places she would one day be healed. And here's the secret. Every wise woman has a story of how she almost lost herself, how she almost gave up her art, her laughter, her soul for the illusion of love. That story is her fire. That story is what makes her unshakable later. Her wisdom came not in a single moment, but in countless small awakenings. The way she began to notice how drained she felt after every encounter. The way her stomach tightened when he dismissed her dreams with a smirk. The way her spirit felt caged in a life that wasn't really hers. Every little ache was a breadcrumb leading her back home to herself. The journey of wisdom always begins in heartbreak, but it doesn't end there. And this is only the beginning of her story. She didn't wake up one morning suddenly transformed, suddenly sure of herself, suddenly done with the pain. No, wisdom rarely arrives like lightning. It comes in echoes, in whispers that grow louder each time you ignore them. It was in the moments after he brushed off her tears with the words, "You're too sensitive," as if her feelings were defects instead of signals. It was in the way her body felt when she suppressed her truth for too long, tight chest, heavy sighs, that familiar ache in her throat from holding words back. She knew deep down that something inside of her was suffocating. And it was in the quietest of places that she began to rise. One evening, while he sat scrolling endlessly on his phone, she stepped outside. The air was cool, the night sky vast and indifferent. She tilted her head back and asked a question out loud for the first time. What am I doing here? It wasn't a question for him or even for herself. It was a question for life, for God, for the universe, for whoever or whatever might be listening. And in that moment, she felt something stir within her, something ancient and unbreakable. That was when she began to understand the second thing a wise woman never does with a man. She never makes excuses for disrespect. She never rewrites his carelessness into a story of patience. She never paints over his indifference with colors of hope. A wise woman doesn't justify the cracks in the foundation by telling herself the house still stands. She knows better. She knows that love without respect is a slow death, and she will not die like that. But before she claimed that wisdom fully, she lingered in the in-between. She remembered how she used to defend him to her friends. They would see her eyes dimming, her laughter becoming rare, and they would ask, "Are you okay? Are you sure this is what you want?" And she would smile, shrug, and say, "He's just stressed. He has a lot going on. He's not usually like this, but he was always like that." And every excuse she made was a stone in the wall she built around her own truth. One night, her best friend said something she couldn't forget. You love him enough to cover his flaws, but do you love yourself enough to see them? The words hit her like glass shattering on the floor, because deep down, she knew she didn't. Not yet. But the seed was planted. From that night on, every time she excused his absence, every time she overlooked his lies, every time she tolerated being last on his list, those words echoed louder. Do you love yourself enough to see? And slowly she began to. The third thing a wise woman never does with a man is beg for love that should flow freely. She never chases crumbs of affection, never lowers her voice to keep him comfortable, never twists herself into knots for a man who refuses to see her. A wise woman knows love is not something to be pried from clenched fists. It is something given with open hands or not at all. She remembered the last time she begged, not with words, but with silence. With the way she dressed up for him one night, hoping he would notice. With the way she asked softly, do you still love me, when his distance became unbearable? He smiled faintly, kissed her forehead, and turned away, leaving her heart colder than before. That night she realized that begging for love is not just humiliating, it is hollow. It drains the spirit, leaving nothing but echoes of need. And she swore silently to herself, never again. That promise became her turning point. She began to reclaim her laughter, not for him, but for herself. She started walking alone in the park, headphones in, rediscovering the songs that once made her feel alive. She reconnected with her art, her writing, her passions that had been gathering dust in the corners of her soul. And with every stroke of the brush, every word on the page, she pieced herself back together. And then something unexpected happened. He noticed. He saw the light returning to her, the independence she was reclaiming, and suddenly he wanted back in. He complimented her again, called her beautiful, asked why she seemed so different. For a moment, she felt the old pull. Maybe this was the change she had been waiting for. Maybe now he would rise to meet her. But she remembered the truth she had earned in pain. A wise woman never confuses attention with love. He wasn't drawn to her soul. He was threatened by her strength. He didn't miss her essence. He missed her submission. And she knew it. So when he leaned in one night and said, "You're mine, don't forget that." She smiled softly, but inside she laughed. Not the laughter of joy, but the laughter of a woman who finally sees through the illusion. She wasn't his. She never had been. She belonged to herself. That's the fourth thing a wise woman never does with a man. She never allows herself to be owned. She may love deeply, fiercely, wholly, but she does not surrender her freedom, her mind, or her spirit to anyone. She knows the difference between love and possession, between devotion and control, and she will not be caged again. This was the beginning of her rebirth. She started speaking up more. She started saying no without guilt, started drawing boundaries that once terrified her. At first he resisted, he mocked her, called her dramatic, tried to push against the walls she was building. But this time, the walls weren't built from fear, they were built from self-respect. She knew now that real love honors those walls. It doesn't try to tear them down. Real love says, I see you, I hear you, I respect you. Anything less was not love. It was control dressed in charm. And the final lesson, the one she carried like fire in her chest, was this. A wise woman never settles for a man who cannot rise with her. She does not shrink to keep him comfortable, does not pause her growth to wait for him to catch up. She climbs, and if he cannot climb with her, she lets him go. The day she walked away was not loud or dramatic. She didn't slam the door or hurl insults. She simply packed her things, held her head high, and left. And though her heart was heavy, her soul was light, because for the first time, she was choosing herself. And that choice is what made her wise. The day she left, the world looked different. Not brighter at first, just quieter. The kind of quiet that follows a storm, where broken branches still lie across the ground, but the air smells clean, fresh, almost new. She carried her bag through the doorway without looking back, because she knew if she looked, she might hesitate, and hesitation had already cost her years. This time, she moved forward without permission, without apology. The first nights were the hardest. She lay awake in a bed that felt too big, surrounded by silence that felt too heavy. Memories replayed like shadows on the walls. The way he once held her hand, the way she once laughed without knowing what was coming, the way she once begged without realizing she was losing herself in the process. But grief has its own kind of wisdom. It teaches you what mattered and what was only illusion. And slowly, the silence became her ally. She began to notice things she hadn't in years. The way the morning sun lit up her kitchen window, the way her coffee tasted richer when she sipped it alone without waiting for him to join her, the way her own laughter sounded when she watched a movie she loved. These were small resurrections, tiny reminders that she was still alive, still capable of joy, still whole. But healing is not just about rediscovering joy. Healing is also about facing the shadows. There were nights she cried harder than she thought possible, crumbling on the floor with questions like, why wasn't I enough and what did I do wrong? But here's the truth only a wise woman learns. Sometimes the questions themselves are the wound. And sometimes the healing begins when you stop asking why you weren't enough for someone else and start asking why you believed you had to be. One evening, she found herself writing in a journal. At first, just fragments. I'm tired. I'm angry. I feel lost. But over time, the fragments became truths. I was never too much. He was too little. I was never hard to love. He was unwilling to try. I was never unworthy. I simply gave my worth to someone who couldn't carry it. The words poured out like fire, burning away the lies she had carried for too long. And in those words, she finally met herself again. She began to live differently. She stopped saying yes when she meant no. She stopped apologizing for existing too loudly. She stopped explaining herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. She found strength in boundaries, power in solitude, and freedom in honesty. And with every step, she became the woman she once needed. The woman who had been buried beneath years of compromise. And then, as life always does, it tested her newfound wisdom. A new man entered her orbit, not in a grand cinematic way, just a quiet conversation in a bookstore, an unexpected connection over shared laughter. For a moment, she felt the old pull, the butterflies, the excitement, the hope. But this time, she paid attention not just to how she felt about him, but to how she felt about herself around him. Did she feel safe, seen, respected? Did her soul expand in his presence, or did it shrink? And that's when she realized the full circle of her growth, because the old version of her would have lost herself in the rush, would have ignored red flags, would have justified the smallest slights. But the woman she had become was different. She moved slower. She listened more to her body, her intuition, her soul. She knew now that love was not about intensity. It was about consistency, not about promises. It was about proof. She knew now that the 5 things a wise woman never does with a man weren't just rules. They were truths she had bled for. She never loses herself. She never excuses disrespect. She never begs for love. She never allows herself to be owned. She never settles for less than she deserves. These weren't just lessons. They were her bones now, the structure of who she had become. And with that wisdom, everything changed. When this new man spoke, she listened, not just to his words, but to the energy behind them. When he showed interest, she didn't rush to fill the silence with gratitude. She let it breathe to see if it would grow. When he respected her boundaries, she noticed. When he asked about her dreams and really listened, she smiled. And when he gave her space to be fully herself, she felt a peace she had never known. But here's the most important part. Whether he stayed or left, she knew she would be okay, because wisdom had taught her the one truth she once feared to believe. She was whole on her own. Love could be a gift, yes, but it was no longer her oxygen. She had learned to breathe without it. Years later, when she looked back on the woman she used to be, the one who begged, the one who stayed silent, the one who abandoned herself for a man's comfort, she didn't feel shame. She felt gratitude, because that woman's pain built her strength. That woman's tears watered her roots. That woman's brokenness created the space for wisdom to enter. Without her, the wise woman she had become would never have existed. And so she lived differently. She carried herself with quiet dignity, not loud defiance. She spoke with grace, not apology. She loved, but she loved wisely, not recklessly, not desperately, but from a place of fullness. And every woman who crossed her path felt it. This presence, this strength, this unshakable truth. Because a wise woman isn't just made for herself. She becomes a lighthouse for others. She becomes the story another woman hears at 2 a.m. when she's crying in the dark, wondering if she should stay or she deserves more. She becomes the reminder that healing is possible, that strength is born in silence, that love without self-love is not love at all. And in her final reflection, sitting by the ocean one evening, she whispered to herself words she wished she had known years before. I was never asking for too much. I was just asking the wrong man. And with that, she smiled because she knew the truth would never leave her again.